My granddaughter persuaded me to give her the family ring for safekeeping, but in reality she sold it to a pawnshop to buy herself a car. For me it was like a knife in the back. I can still see it as if I were holding it now, the ring that once belonged to my mother. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, no, it was the heartbeat of our family history, carried from hand to hand, mother to daughter with quiet reverence. It was a ring that had lived through births, weddings, and funerals, absorbing the very rhythm of our lives. The band was made of yellow gold, worn smooth over the years by the constant touch of women who treasured it. If you held it close, you could see the tiny grooves where the engravings had once been, nearly erased by decades of polishing, soap, and sweat. I remember my mother used to run her thumb across it absent-mindedly, the way some people turn a rosary bead in their fingers. She said the touch of it comforted her, as though all the women before her whispered through the metal, reminding her she wasn't alone. At its crown sat a stone, an emerald so deep and green it looked like it had captured a piece of spring itself. It wasn't oversized or flashy. It wasn't meant to draw the eyes of strangers. Rather, it had a quiet dignity. The gem was cut square, framed by tiny diamonds that winked faintly, like fireflies caught in gold. It had a weight to it too. Not heavy enough to burden, but just enough that when you slipped it on, you knew you were carrying something of consequence. I once had it appraised, though I almost felt guilty doing so, as if putting a dollar figure on it betrayed what it really meant. The jeweler cleaned his glasses twice, leaned over, and finally told me with a whistle that it was worth about $150,000. He looked at me like he expected me to be surprised, but I wasn't. To me, its worth had always been far beyond numbers. Priceless, I told him, and I meant it. Because no money could buy back the nights I'd watched my mother's hands, strong from years of washing laundry by hand and kneading bread, rest with that ring glinting softly under the kitchen light as she stirred the soup or mended a torn sleeve. When my mother grew older and her hands began to stiffen, she took mine in hers one afternoon. I remember it was autumn, and the window was open, letting in the smell of leaves and the faint sound of children playing down the block. She slid the ring off her finger, her knuckles swollen and pale, and pressed it into my palm. Her eyes, so clear and insistent, met mine as she spoke. "Promise me, child, this stays in the family. It has seen too much to be lost to strangers." I nodded, tears already burning my eyes, and closed my fingers around it. That was the day I inherited not just a ring but a duty. Promise. I vowed to her that I would keep it safe, that it would remain a thread tying us to the women before us, and the women yet to come. Through the years, the ring lived on my hand the way it had lived on hers. When I worked in the garden, dirt tucked under my nails, I sometimes slipped it into a small dish by the sink, worried it might be scratched. But more often I wore it daily, letting it remind me of her steady love. When my children were born, I looked at the stone and thought, "Mama, you are here with me." When I lost my husband, I turned the band again and again, as if it were the only anchor left keeping me from floating away in grief. That emerald shone at every Thanksgiving table I set, every Christmas morning when the little ones tore through wrapping paper. It sparkled faintly when I clapped at school plays, and it glistened when I waved goodbye to my children as they drove off to college. Always it was a reminder. My mother, my grandmother, and all the unnamed women who had come before me, they were still with us. That was the true worth of the ring. It was memory, flesh turned to gold, laughter turned to stone. And oh, how many times I told myself I would never let it leave our family. I even wrote it down once, tucked into an old Bible. "The emerald ring belongs to the daughters of our line. May it never be sold or lost." I thought that would be enough. A vow written in my hand, sealed by memory. But vows are only as strong as the hearts that hold them, and mine, though steadfast, would one day be tested. My mother had trusted me, and I would come to trust another too easily, too blindly. I thought I was passing on not just a jewel but a legacy. I thought I was honoring her wish. How little I knew then of what was to come. It was an ordinary afternoon when she asked me, the kind of day where the sky was neither bright nor stormy, just a soft gray like it was holding its breath. I was sitting by the window, knitting a scarf that I'd been working on for months. The radio hummed an old tune in the background, one of those songs that never quite leaves your bones. That's when she walked in, my granddaughter, her face flushed as though she'd been running, though I knew she hadn't. She stood there a moment, her eyes fixed not on me but on my hand, on the ring. "Grandma," she began, and I knew from the tremble in her voice that something weighed heavy on her heart. She sat down beside me, close enough that I could smell her perfume, sweet, too sweet, like flowers forced to bloom too soon. When she finally looked at me, I saw tears gathering in her eyes. She wasn't the kind to cry easily, not even as a little girl. She was proud, fierce sometimes, stubborn as a mule. But that day her voice cracked like a child's. "Grandma, give me this ring to keep. I want to feel that you are always there." Oh, my heart. If you've ever been asked for something by someone you love with tears in their eyes, you know the way reason crumbles. All at once I saw not the grown woman she was, but the little girl she had once been, the child who used to climb into my lap with scraped knees, who begged me for one more bedtime story, who once pressed wild daisies into my hand as if they were roses from a king's garden. Her words struck deep. I want to feel that you are always there. That was what the ring had always meant to me. Presence, memory, love carried forward. To hear her say it back in her own way felt like destiny knocking. My mother had placed the ring in my hand once, and now perhaps it was my turn. Still there was hesitation. I looked down at the emerald, its green depths catching the dim light, and I thought of the promise I had made. I could almost hear my mother's voice again, faint but steady. "This stays in the family." Was I honoring her wish by giving it to my granddaughter, or was I breaking it? I asked softly, "Are you sure, child? It's more than a pretty jewel. It carries our story. Do you understand that?" She nodded quickly, her hand reaching for mine, her tears slipping free now. "Yes, Grandma. I do. That's why I want it. To keep it safe. To keep you with me always." And that was it, the crack in the wall of my caution. Her hand was warm, trembling against mine, and her words seemed so earnest. I wanted to believe her. No, more than that, I needed to believe her. Age teaches us many things, but it doesn't harden the heart as much as people think. If anything, it softens it, makes it yearn to trust again, to pass on what matters before time runs too thin. I slipped the ring from my finger slowly. After so many years, it left a pale circle of skin behind, like a ghostly reminder of all the days it had rested there. My hand felt suddenly bare, almost naked. For a moment I hesitated, turning it over in my palm, feeling the familiar weight. My chest tightened, but when I looked at her, my granddaughter, her cheeks wet with tears, her eyes wide and shining with what I thought was love, all doubt melted. I placed the ring in her hand, her fingers curled around it, and I thought I saw a flicker of something in her face, something I couldn't name then. Relief? Triumph? But I brushed the thought aside. I told myself it was gratitude. That was what I wanted it to be. "Carry it well," I whispered. "It is not just a ring. It is your great-grandmother's laughter, her prayers, her sacrifices. It is the meals she cooked, the nights she soothed, the mornings she rose before the sun. It is my promise to her now passed to you. Don't forget." She nodded again, her tears falling faster. She hugged me tightly, pressing her head against my shoulder. And oh, how my heart swelled. In that moment I felt certain I was doing the right thing. Certain that she would guard the memory, the love, the legacy. That she was the one to carry our story forward. As she left that evening, slipping the ring into her purse, she turned back at the door. "Thank you, Grandma," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'll keep it forever." I smiled, my hand still tingling from the absence of the ring. Forever. I echoed, as if saying it out loud would make it so. That night, as I lay in bed, I touched my bare finger again and again, feeling both emptiness and peace. I told myself this was the way it was meant to be. I had trusted her with the most precious thing I had, and in doing so, I had fulfilled both my mother's wish and my own heart's desire. I never could have guessed then how cruelly that trust would be betrayed. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that slips by without fuss. I had just set a kettle on the stove and was folding dish towels when the knock came at my door. Not hurried, not timid, but steady. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. I knew that knock. It belonged to someone who'd known me long before arthritis found my hands and before my hair turned white. When I opened the door, there stood Henry, my childhood friend. We'd grown up on the same street, back when the neighborhood was filled with clotheslines and front porches, when children played stickball until the streetlights buzzed on. His face was older now, of course, lined, tired, the weight of years tucked into the corners of his eyes, but his smile was the same. Only that afternoon it faltered. "Henry," I said warmly, but the welcome caught in my throat when I saw the unease in his eyes. He shifted his weight, took off his cap, and held it nervously in his hands. "May I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "The kettle's on. Sit down, sit down." He settled into the armchair by the window, but his shoulders were stiff, his fingers tapping against the cap brim. This wasn't the easy company of old times. Something troubled him, and I braced myself. When I brought the tea to the table, he cleared his throat. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced," he said. I wasn't sure if I should." "You're always welcome," I reassured him, though my heart had begun a slow, uneasy beat. "Tell me what's on your mind." He hesitated, his eyes darting toward my hands. He looked for something, and I knew instantly what it was. The ring. The absence was obvious. My bare finger seemed to shout louder than words. Finally he spoke. "I was downtown yesterday. Passed by that old pawnshop near Main, the one next to the barber's. And well, I don't know how to say this, but I swear I saw your ring in the window." My heart thudded hard against my ribs. "My ring?" I asked, my voice caught between disbelief and laughter, as if by laughing I could dismiss it. "Yes." His tone was gentle, cautious, as though he feared breaking me with the truth. "The emerald. The gold band worn thin. I'd know it anywhere. I remember your mother wearing it when we were children. I couldn't be mistaken." I set my teacup down too quickly, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. For a long moment I just sat there, staring at him, my mind scrambling. The ring was with my granddaughter. I had given it to her only weeks ago. Surely he was mistaken. Perhaps it was another ring similar in shape. Emeralds weren't uncommon after all. "That can't be," I said at last, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "It must have been another ring. You know how memory plays tricks. Surely you're mistaken." Henry sighed and looked at me with a sadness that cut deeper than his words. "I prayed I was wrong," he admitted. "I almost didn't come, but I couldn't keep it from you. I know what that ring means to you." I shook my head, more to steady myself than to argue. "She has it. My granddaughter. I gave it to her to keep safe. She'd never, she wouldn't." But the sentence trailed off into silence. Wouldn't she? That was the question I didn't want to let in. Henry reached across the table, his old hands warm against mine. "Maybe it's nothing. Maybe I'm mistaken. But you ought to look into it. For your peace of mind, if nothing else." We sat quietly after that, the kettle hissing softly in the kitchen. My thoughts churned. I wanted to cling to the picture of her teary eyes, her trembling hands as she asked for the ring. I wanted to believe that her words, "I want to feel that you are always there," were true, not just clever. When Henry finally rose to leave, he said softly, Forgive me if I've upset you. I only thought you should know. I hugged him at the door, though my arms felt heavy, my body stiff. Thank you, Henry, I whispered, though part of me wished he'd never spoken at all. After he left, the house seemed unbearably still. I walked to my dresser and opened the little wooden box where I had once kept the ring. Empty, of course, it had been weeks since I'd passed it on. I pressed my fingers against the velvet lining as though the stone might reappear if I wished hard enough. I told myself Henry was mistaken. That was all. He was old, his eyes not what they used to be. He'd confused it with another ring. That explanation was easier to carry than suspicion. Still, that night as I lay in bed, the unease grew louder. What if he was right? What if the ring I had trusted into her hands now sat in a pawnshop window, staring out at strangers? I rolled over, clutching the quilt my mother had once stitched, whispering to myself, no, she wouldn't do that. Not my granddaughter. Not her. But even as I spoke the words, my heart ached with doubt. For 2 days after Henry's visit, I lived in denial. I told myself he had been mistaken, that old eyes could play tricks. I polished the silverware, watered my African violets, baked a batch of cornbread, little ordinary acts, all the while pushing away the gnawing thought that would not leave me. What if he was right? By the 3rd day I could stand it no longer. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and took the bus downtown. I remember how the city smelled that morning, like exhaust and fried food mingling in the air. The shops looked the same as always, but my heart was thudding so loud I could hardly take it in. My hands gripped my purse as if I were holding onto the edge of a cliff. The pawnshop stood on the corner just as Henry had said, its dusty window crowded with watches, coins, and rings. I told myself one last time that I would prove him wrong, that I would walk past, look once, and go home relieved. But then I saw it. There under the smudged glass sat my mother's ring. The emerald caught the light, deep and green, just as it had on her hand, just as it had on mine. The band, worn thin with years of touch, glowed faintly in the gloom. There was no mistake. No other ring could hold that exact shade of green, that familiar weight of memory. My knees weakened, and I had to steady myself against the wall. I don't know how long I stood there staring, my breath fogging the glass. Strangers passed me on the sidewalk, but the world had gone quiet around me. It was as though time itself had stopped, holding me in that moment of discovery. I pushed the door open, the bell jangling overhead. The air inside smelled of metal and dust. A man behind the counter looked up and nodded. My voice shook as I asked, "That ring in the window, when did it come in?" He glanced at his ledger. "Couple weeks ago. Young woman sold it. Said she needed cash for a car." His words fell like stones in my chest. "Do you remember her?" I asked, though I already knew. He described her, young, dark hair, nervous smile. My granddaughter. My flesh and blood. I felt something break inside me then, something deeper than bone. It wasn't just the ring she had sold. It was the trust, the love, the bond between us. She had taken what was never truly hers and traded it for steel and wheels, for something that would rust and fade. Love exchanged for luxury. Memory for metal. I asked the man if I could hold it. He unlocked the case and set it in my palm. The emerald gleamed as though nothing had changed, but everything had. My mother's voice echoed in me. "Promise me this stays in the family." And I, foolish old woman, had let it slip away. The man told me the price. Far more than I had in my purse. But I told him, "Don't sell it. I'll be back." My voice cracked with desperation, and he softened, nodding. I walked home in a fog, my heart heavy as lead. Each step felt harder than the last. At home I sat in my chair and wept, silent tears at first, then sobs that shook me. I cried for my mother, for the promise I had broken, for the child I had trusted who had betrayed me. Memories came flooding. Her little hand in mine, her laughter echoing in the yard, the day she graduated, the way I had looked at her with pride. All those moments seemed to crumble, tainted by what she had done. That night I did not sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows twisting across the plaster. I thought of the car she must have bought, shiny and new, smelling of leather. I imagined her driving it, smiling, carefree, while the ring sat under glass, stripped of its story, waiting for a stranger's hand. The pain was not just losing the ring. It was losing her, the girl I thought she was, the woman I thought she would become. In one cruel act, she had shown me a side I never wanted to see. I pressed my hand against my bare finger, whispering to myself, she chose the car over her grandmother. She chose steel over blood. The words tasted bitter, but they were true. By dawn, I knew this wasn't just a loss of jewelry. It was the end of innocence, hers and mine. I could no longer pretend. The trust one had given her so freely was shattered, and no glue in the world could mend it. I rose from bed, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat by the window. The world outside looked unchanged. The birds sang, children laughed on their way to school. But inside me, everything was different. A chapter of my life had closed with a slam. The ring could be reclaimed, yes. But trust? That was gone forever. My mind wouldn't stop replaying it. How could she? That question circled me like a vulture. It came in whispers at midnight, in sharp pangs at 3 in the morning, and in heavy sighs as dawn crept through the curtains. When I finally did drift into shallow dreams, they betrayed me. I would see my mother's face, her eyes soft and serious as she pressed the ring into my hand. In those dreams, she spoke the same words she had on that autumn afternoon so long ago. Promise me this stays in the family. I always answered yes, and then I'd wake with tears on my pillow, ashamed that I had failed her. During the day I tried to keep busy, to push the thoughts aside. I scrubbed the kitchen floor though it didn't need scrubbing. I reorganized the pantry, baked pies I couldn't eat, ironed pillowcases just for the sake of it. But the nights, they left no room for distraction. Only me, my thoughts, and the ache of betrayal. I kept going back in my memory, searching for signs I had missed. Was there a moment, some little clue that should have warned me? I remembered her eyes brimming with tears, her trembling voice as she said, I want to feel that you are always there. I had believed her. Oh, I had believed her. But now I wondered, were those tears real? Or were they a mask she knew I wouldn't question? The more I thought, the heavier my chest grew. Trust, once broken, is not just a wound. It's a weight you carry into every thought, every breath. Sometimes I debated with myself. One part of me whispered, forgive her. She's young. Youth is foolish, greedy, careless. Maybe she didn't understand. But the other part, the part that remembered my mother's face, shook its head. No. She knew. She looked you in the eye and promised, and she broke it. Forgiveness does not change that. Around midnight, I would rise from bed and walk the house, my slippers soft against the floor. The rooms felt haunted, not by ghosts but by memories. The chair where my granddaughter had once sat as a child, swinging her legs, giggling at stories. The cupboard where she used to sneak cookies when she thought I wasn't looking. The hallway where she had once hugged me tight after a school recital. I touched these places, these silent reminders, and the weight of what she had done pressed harder. I hadn't just lost a ring. I had lost the girl I thought she was. One night I pulled out an old shoebox from the closet, filled with letters and photographs. There was one picture of her at age 6, her hair in pigtails, her smile wide and toothless. She had been sitting on my lap, my arm wrapped around her, the emerald ring shining faintly on my finger. I stared at that photo until my eyes blurred. What would that little girl say to the woman she had become? Would she even recognize herself? The clock ticked. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. The hours crept slowly, heavy as stones. I prayed sometimes, whispering into the darkness, Lord, give me wisdom. Tell me, do I forgive and forget, or do I fight for what is right? The silence that followed was both comforting and cruel. I thought of my mother again. She had been a woman of strength, quiet but unyielding. She had worked her hands raw to keep our family clothed and fed, and she had never bent when it came to her principles. I imagined what she would say now. I could almost hear her voice. Do not let our memory be sold for a car. That thought stayed with me through the sleepless hours. Forgiveness was one thing. Forgetting was another. And fighting might be the only way to keep my promise. By dawn, when the light began to creep across the floor, I would rise weary but determined. The nights of tossing and turning carved something sharper inside me. It was no longer just grief, it was resolve. Yes, I was old. Yes, I was tired. But I was still my mother's daughter. And if the ring could be reclaimed, so too could the dignity of keeping my word. The sleepless nights had done their work. They had turned sorrow into a choice. Forgive and let the memory be lost, or stand and fight to honor it. And I knew deep down which path I would take. The day I decided to face her, the sky was brittle blue. The kind of cold clarity that makes you see things sharper than you wish. I had not slept well for weeks, my body aching with restless nights, my heart heavy with the weight of what I now knew. Still, I gathered myself, dressed carefully. Nothing fancy, just my clean cardigan, my sturdy shoes, and the courage that had been slowly building in me. Her house sat neat and new on the edge of town, its driveway holding the proof of her betrayal. There it was, the shiny car, bright red, glinting like temptation itself. I stood for a moment at the edge of the driveway, staring at it. My mother's emerald had been traded for that metal beast. I pressed a hand against my chest, steadying myself before climbing the steps. She opened the door with a smile that quickly faded when she saw my face. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was still young, still beautiful, but her eyes no longer carried the softness I once thought was hers. They were guarded now, sharp, almost impatient. I stepped inside when she moved aside. The living room smelled of new paint and leather, modern, polished, but soulless somehow. It was not the smell of a home built with care. I turned to her. My voice was low but steady. "How could you do this?" She blinked, feigning confusion. "Do what?" "The ring," I said, the word catching in my throat. "My mother's ring. The one I entrusted to you. I saw it in the pawnshop window." For a moment she was silent, her mouth parting as though to deny it. But then her expression hardened. She crossed her arms, lifting her chin. "It's just an old ring," she said coolly. "You're exaggerating. It would have been mine anyway, sooner or later. I only took what was coming to me." Her words cut sharper than any knife. Just an old ring. My mother's prayers, her sacrifices, the love of generations, reduced to just an old ring. I stared at her, my chest aching. "Do you understand what you've done? That ring wasn't yours to sell. It carried our history, our family's story. You traded it for a car. For something that will rust, that will be gone in 10 years. And in doing so, you broke not only my trust but our bond." She shrugged, coldness settling on her face like ice. "Grandma, you're being dramatic. Times are different now. I needed a car, something useful. A piece of jewelry doesn't feed anyone, doesn't get me to work. Sentimental, that's all. And someday it would have been mine anyway. I just took it sooner." Her voice was sharp, almost dismissive. She did not look at me with shame, only irritation, as if my hurt were an inconvenience. I wanted to cry, to plead with her to see, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, silence filled the space between us, heavier than any words could be. Silence that said, "You are not the person I thought you were." Silence that said, "We are no longer the same blood and spirit, even if we are in flesh." The clock ticked loudly on her wall. A car passed outside. Life went on, but in that room something precious died. I finally spoke, my voice trembling. "When my mother gave me that ring, she made me promise it would stay in the family, that it would never be sold, never lost to strangers. I kept that promise for decades, only to see it broken in weeks. You may think it was yours by right, but you forgot the weight of the memory it carried. And now my voice broke. Now that memory is stained. Her face did not soften. She only shook her head, muttering, "You're overreacting." I stood there looking at her one last time, trying to find the child I once knew in her face. The child who had pressed daisies into my hand, who had whispered bedtime secrets under quilts. But that child was gone. I turned toward the door, my hands trembling. "I trusted you," I whispered, my back to her. "And you turned that trust into betrayal. That is something I cannot forget." I left her house that day with a weight heavier than I had ever carried. The car gleamed in the sun as I walked past it, mocking me with its shine. I thought of the ring again, my mother's ring, sitting under cold glass in a pawnshop, stripped of its soul. The confrontation had not brought answers nor healing. Only truth. Cold, cruel truth. My granddaughter had chosen to sever the bond of trust for the sake of vanity and convenience. And in her eyes I saw no remorse. The silence that followed me home was deafening. In that silence I knew something had ended. Something between us that could never be mended. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the lamp casting a circle of yellow light across the wood. I spread out the little stack of papers I had kept for years, the old appraisal from the jeweler, the letter my mother had written me long ago, and even a black and white photograph of her wearing the ring on her wedding day. These were more than papers, they were proof. Proof that the ring was not just mine, but part of our family's legacy. I knew then that I had a choice. To let her betrayal stand, or to fight for the memory that ring carried. Forgiveness might heal a soul, but it wouldn't bring the emerald back. And I would not let strangers slip it onto their fingers, never knowing the story it held. The next morning I wrapped the documents in a folder, tucked them into my handbag, and took the bus to the police station. The ride felt endless. My heart pounded, not from fear of the law, but from the ache of what it meant, that I was turning against my own blood. Mothers and grandmothers are meant to protect, to shield, to cover sins with love. But this was different. This was not a scraped knee or a childish lie. This was betrayal carved deep into the bone. When I stepped inside the station, the air was cool, smelling faintly of ink and disinfectant. The officer at the desk looked up, surprised perhaps to see an old woman standing there with such a determined look. "How can I help you, ma'am?" I cleared my throat, my voice quivering only slightly. "I've come to report a theft. My ring. A family heirloom. It was pawned without my consent." He gestured for me to sit, and I laid out the folder of documents like a schoolteacher presenting lessons. "Here," I said, pointing to the appraisal, the photograph, the letter. "Proof that the ring belonged to me. Proof that it was never hers to sell." The officer studied the papers carefully. He glanced at me, his face softening with respect. "You've kept everything," he said. "Yes," I replied, "because it matters. It isn't about money. It's about memory. My mother trusted me to guard it, and I will not let that trust be broken." He nodded, scribbling notes, asking questions about the pawnshop, the date, the name of my granddaughter. Each answer felt like pressing a bruise, painful but necessary. At the end he promised, "We'll look into it, ma'am. With this documentation we can open a case." When I stepped back outside, the sun was high, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of relief. Not joy, no, that was gone, but the steady comfort of knowing I had acted. I was not standing idle while my family's history slipped through my fingers. Still, it was not easy. Word spread quickly, as it always does. Whispers traveled through family lines, carried by cousins and neighbors. Some called me brave. Others muttered that I was cruel, dragging my own granddaughter into trouble. But they did not understand it wasn't about punishing her. It was about honoring my mother, about keeping a promise that mattered more than comfort. At night, I still tossed and turned, but my prayers were different now. Lord, I whispered, help me see this through. Help me protect what was entrusted to me. The silence of those nights no longer felt hollow. It felt like resolve being tempered like iron in a fire. A week later, I received the call. The police had retrieved the ring from the pawn shop. They told me I would need to come sign papers, confirm ownership, and continue with the process. My hands trembled as I held the phone, tears spilling down my cheeks. Not tears of joy, not entirely, but tears of weary relief. I pressed the receiver to my chest after I hung up and whispered into the empty kitchen. Mama, I'm bringing it home. The battle was not over. There would be questions, hearings, perhaps even court. My granddaughter would face consequences that would leave scars on her name. That knowledge broke me in places I cannot describe. But when I thought of my mother's eyes, of the weight of that emerald, I knew I had chosen rightly. This was not just about me. It was about every woman who had carried that ring before me, and every woman who might carry it after. They deserved to have their memory protected, their sacrifices honored. And if it meant standing against my own blood, then so be it. The battle for memory had begun, and I, weary as I was, would see it through. When the police called and told me the ring had been retrieved, my breath caught in my chest. For a moment I thought I might collapse right there in the kitchen, my hand gripping the back of the chair to steady myself. It was the news I had prayed for through so many sleepless nights. The ring was safe, no longer sitting under glass in that pawnshop window, no longer waiting for some stranger's careless hand. 2 days later, I walked into the station to reclaim it. The officer who had helped me before met me with a kind smile and a clipboard of papers to sign. My signature shook as I wrote it, the pen slipping slightly against the page. He excused himself, then returned with a small envelope. Inside was the ring. When he placed it in my palm, I nearly wept. The emerald shone just as it always had, deep green, steady, alive with memory. I turned it over, feeling the familiar weight, the smooth band worn by generations of touch. It should have felt like triumph, like a battle won. And yet, as I stood there in that fluorescent-lit room, I felt only grief. I slipped it onto my finger. The fit was the same as ever, but my hand felt colder somehow, as though the ring itself knew what had happened. I whispered softly, "You're home." But the words caught in my throat. Walking back through town, I should have held my head high. But I found myself staring at the sidewalk instead. Victory can feel heavy when it comes at too great a cost. The ring was mine again, yes. But trust was gone forever. At home, I set the ring carefully into its little wooden box on my dresser, the same place it had rested for decades. I sat beside it for a long while, staring at the emerald under the lamplight. My mother's voice came to me again. "Promise me this stays in the family." I had kept that promise. I had fought for it. But the price was a granddaughter's betrayal. A fracture in the bond that had once been the brightest part of my life. That night, I sat in my chair by the window with a blanket around my shoulders. The street outside was quiet, the lamplight spilling soft gold onto the pavement. I turned the ring in my hand again and again, waiting for the joy to return, waiting for the relief to outweigh the grief. But it never came. Instead, I thought of her, the little girl she once was, and the young woman she had become. I thought of the car sitting proudly in her driveway, gleaming red, bought at the cost of memory. I wondered if she felt any regret, if she even cared that the ring was gone from her possession. The thought cut deeper than the betrayal itself, that perhaps she had never valued it at all, not as I had, not as my mother had. Neighbors came by in the days that followed, bringing casseroles and pies, as neighbors do when they sense sorrow. They said kind things. "You did the right thing. At least you got it back." But their words fell flat. None of them knew the ache of holding something precious that no longer carried joy. None of them knew what it was to win a battle but lose the heart of someone you love. I polished the ring one afternoon, rubbing it gently with a soft cloth until it gleamed. I told myself I had preserved its story, that the women before me would be proud. And yet, I could not wear it without feeling the sharp sting of betrayal pressed against my skin. So I set it back into its box, closed the lid and placed it in the drawer. Sometimes I opened it late at night just to be sure it was still there. The sight of it brought both comfort and sorrow in equal measure. Comfort because I had honored my mother's wish. Sorrow because the cost had been my granddaughter's trust, and my trust in her. It was a painful victory, and victories of that kind leave scars. One evening, I brewed myself a pot of tea and sat at the kitchen table with the ring resting before me. I tried to remember happier times, the laughter of my children, the warmth of family dinners, the way the ring had once been a symbol of connection. But even in memory, a shadow lingered now. I realized then that some battles cannot truly be won. You can reclaim what was taken, you can preserve what was threatened, but the damage lingers quiet and unyielding. The ring was safe, the memory was preserved, but my heart was lonelier than ever. I whispered again into the quiet, as though my mother could hear me. I kept the promise. I did what I could. And though the emerald sparkled back at me, it did not answer. When the papers were filed and the case opened, it became official. My granddaughter's name was written into criminal records. Seeing it there in black and white was like being struck across the face. I had raised children, I had watched grandchildren grow, and never had I imagined that our family name would be spoken in a courtroom, weighed against charges of theft and betrayal. The first hearing was small, just a clerk, a lawyer, and a judge in a modest room that smelled of old wood and dust. I sat in the back, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the ring resting in its box at home like a silent witness. She stood there, my granddaughter, her head tilted high, defiance etched into her young face. She didn't look at me. Not once. The judge read the charges, his voice firm and steady. Pawning of property not legally owned. Fraudulent representation of possession. The words were like stones falling into a well, each one sinking deeper. I felt my heart ache with every syllable. Her lawyer argued she hadn't understood, that she believed the ring was hers by right, that no malice had been intended. But I knew better. She had understood enough to sell it for a car. She had understood enough to hide it from me. The truth was simple. She had chosen herself over her family, over memory, over love. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, my knees stiff, my breath trembling. The courtroom grew quiet as I held up the photograph of my mother wearing the ring. My voice wavered, but I forced the words out. This ring has been in my family for generations. It was never hers to sell. It was given to me with a promise that it remain in the family. I honored that promise for decades. She broke it in weeks. My throat tightened, but I pressed on. This isn't about money. It's about trust. It's about family. And it's about respect for the ones who came before us. The room was silent when I sat down again. My granddaughter shifted in her seat, her jaw clenched, but she still would not meet my eyes. Outside the courthouse, the whispers began. Neighbors, cousins, even people I barely knew. All had something to say. Did you hear? Her own granddaughter stealing from her. Some shook their heads with pity, others with judgment. Shame seeped into every corner of my days. Not shame for myself, I had done what I must, but shame for what my family had become in the eyes of others. At church I felt the stares, the subtle pauses in conversation. At the grocery store acquaintances avoided my gaze, pretending to study the rows of canned peaches. It was as if our family name had been marked, not in ink this time but in whispers. At home I carried the weight alone. The ring was safe, yes. It sat in its box, glinting under the lamplight. But the house felt emptier than ever. I had won the battle, but I had lost my granddaughter. The silence between us stretched wide, a chasm that no bridge could span. Sometimes, late at night, I would think of her as a child. The way she used to run down the hallway in pigtails. The way she would beg me to bake cookies just because she loved licking the spoon. I would remember her small hand tucked in mine, her laughter ringing bright. And then the image would blur into the young woman standing in court, cold, distant, her eyes hard as stone. It was like mourning someone still alive. The hardest part was knowing that justice had been served. Yet there was no peace in it. The law had done its duty, but my heart still bled. A police file could not stitch together the torn fabric of love. A courtroom could not restore trust once broken. Family gathered now only in fragments. Some came to comfort me, saying I had been right, that I had protected what mattered. Others muttered that I had gone too far, that I should have forgiven and kept it quiet. But none of them had seen the ring in that pawnshop window. None of them had felt my mother's voice in their chest, reminding them of a promise. As for my granddaughter, she kept her distance. Weeks turned into months, and she never came to my door. No phone calls, no letters, no apologies. Just silence, thick and heavy. And so I sat in my chair by the window, the ring safe but my heart aching, listening to the faint hum of life outside while mine felt smaller than ever. Justice had been won, yes. But the victory tasted of ash. The ring rests in its wooden box again, safe and shining, as though nothing ever happened. When I lift the lid, the emerald still glows with that deep green, steady as the earth in springtime. Its beauty has not dimmed, its worth has not changed. But for me it no longer carries joy. Instead, it feels like a mirror of all that has been broken. People sometimes tell me, "At least you got it back." And I nod politely because yes, I did. The law returned it to me. My mother's wish was honored. The promise was kept. On paper, that should be enough. But the truth, whispered in the quiet of my nights, is that my heart no longer trusts as it once did. I used to believe love was stronger than anything. Stronger than greed, stronger than selfishness, stronger than temptation. I believed that the bonds of family could weather any storm. But now I know better. Love can be betrayed. Trust can be traded away for something as shallow as the shine of a new car. And once broken, those things do not heal. Not fully. The hardest part is the silence. My granddaughter has not come to me. She has not apologized. She has not tried to mend the wound. I sit sometimes with the phone in my hand, aching to call her, aching to hear her voice. But then I remember her words, cold as ice. "It's just an old ring. You're exaggerating. It would have been mine anyway." I hear them as if she is standing right before me, and I set the phone back down. So the silence continues. Between us, it is heavier than words could ever be. I walk past her car sometimes, parked proudly in her driveway, bright red, polished and new. She drives it without shame, without a second thought, as if it were not bought at the cost of family trust. It will rust one day, it will break down, but the wound it carved in me will remain. My nights are quieter now, not with peace but with emptiness. I wear the ring sometimes, slipping it onto my finger for comfort, but it no longer feels like a companion, feels like a scar. It reminds me of my mother, yes, but also of the betrayal that nearly tore our family apart. And that, I suppose, is the truth of it. Memory survived, but love was broken beyond repair. I have forgiven her in my prayers, for I know bitterness only poisons the soul. I whisper her name to God and ask for mercy on her heart. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It is not the same as trusting again. The ring will remain in the family, just as my mother wished. One day it will pass on again, but not to the hands I once imagined. I will see to it that it goes to someone who understands, someone who carries not only the jewel but the weight of the promise it represents. Until then, it sits quietly in its box, shining with all the history it holds. And I sit quietly in my chair by the window, watching the seasons turn, feeling the ache of what was lost. Not the emerald, but the innocence, the bond, the love that once warmed my heart. Yes, I won the battle. Yes, the memory endures. But my heart, dear, my heart will not heal. My dears, if in this story you saw yourselves, be sure to write about it in the comments. I would be very interested to read it. Thank you.